Oh, very good. So hello everybody. So we're here today to remember and to transfer merits to Shanta's sister who passed away last Monday, Marianne Murugusa. Murugesa. And so we're going to do, I ordained in a kind of a Thai tradition, but have been happy to live among Sri Lankans in Toronto. And so before coming here, asked, okay, how do I do a traditional ceremony? So we can start with the kind of, with the saying, paying homage to the Buddha in the traditional way, namaskara kien. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. And for those who'd like, we can take the 5 precepts. So please repeat after me. Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Panatipata veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Adinadana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Adinadana veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Kamesu miccāchāra veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Kamesu miccāchāra veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musāvāda veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Musāvāda veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Surameraya majjapamadatthāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Surameraya majjapamadatthāna veramani sikkhapadang samadhiyami. Very good. So, Puri had asked about a kind of a topic for the talk, a bit about kind of impermanence and also kind of living well, living life skillfully. Is that right? Yeah. So usually I like to start with just a little bit of meditation for those who might feel comfortable. So we can just lean forward a little bit and arch our spine and look about 3 feet in front and close our eyes. And can focus in on the breath. Can know when it's coming in. And know when it's going out. If we breathe in a long breath, can just know I'm breathing in a long breath. And if we breathe in a short breath, can just know I'm breathing in a short breath. And can focus in on the breath at the tip of the nose. And if notice any patterns of tension or tightness around the nose, around the eyes, you can just let those relax. And can relax any patterns of tension around the cheeks, around the mouth, around the chin. And can practice breathing in and out from this area at the tip of the nose. And when breathing in and out from the tip of the nose, it can be good to change one's perception of the breath. Sometimes can imagine the breath almost as if it's in front, and one is watching it, but instead can change perception so that it's almost like one is right in the center of the breath. Almost like one was standing under a waterfall. So on the in-breath, one can be totally immersed by the breath. On the out-breath, one can be totally immersed by the breath. And when watching the breath at the tip of the nose, can try to make mindfulness as continuous as possible, being aware all the way through the in-breath. As the in-breath turns to the out-breath, all the way through the out-breath. And as the out-breath turns back to the in-breath again. And before we finish meditating, can spread thoughts of goodwill, wishing may all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. May they put in place the causes necessary to be happy and at ease. And we can make the mind infinite, can make it unbounded, all the way to the ends of the universe and beyond, in every dimension. May all beings all around everywhere be happy and at ease. And can open our eyes and do a short reflection on the Dhamma. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang saranang gacchami, dhammang saranang gacchami, sanghang saranang gacchami. Dutiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, dutiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. Tatiyampi buddhang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi dhammang saranang gacchami, tatiyampi sanghang saranang gacchami. So nice to see everybody here today. It's nice to see people gather together to support one another in times of loss. The kind of people come together, it lets people know that they care about each other, and that if they need anything, then they'll be there for each other. And so kind of in the car on the way over, understand that Marianne was a Christian. And, it's kind of, it's nice we're saying that, there's kind of a lot of generosity practiced in Christianity. All the kind of great world religions have this kind of base of goodness to them, this base of doing good deeds, thinking good thoughts, and speaking good words. And so, the Christian tradition especially has this very good tradition of giving to the poor, of helping out those in need. And understand that Marianne was kind of very involved in her church, very involved in these kind of gifts, giving these kind of things. And so, similarly in the Buddhist tradition, in the sasana that comes down from the Buddha, we have this kind of teaching on giving, this kind of teaching on generosity. It's kind of interesting. Growing up in the West, you kind of tend to think a lot about the kind of external wealth that you might have. You kind of think about your money, your cars, especially when I was growing up. Because when I was growing up, there was this kind of very anti-religious bias. So, when I was young, my parents' generation, my grandparents' generation, kind of Canada was a very religious place at that time. My grandparents' generation, all the communities were organized around their local churches. So you can still see, almost everywhere in Canada, there's like a church every kind of 2-3 blocks. And then in my mother's generation, kind of science, there was this competition in the West between science and religion, and science kind of gained the upper hand. Kind of people became very interested in science, kind of fell away a little bit from their traditional religious teachings. And so for myself growing up, for many friends, for many people in the West, this science was our true religion, kind of the true thing that we looked to. The interesting thing about science is that it doesn't have much to say about questions of ultimate meaning, what's ultimately good to do and why it's good to do it. So what you tend to know is, okay, you got your technology, you kind of do all this stuff. You can get a car that goes really fast. You can get an airplane, that goes really fast. You can make donuts, many donuts from these kind of different things. You can get all these various external, we call external sensual pleasures. The thing about these kind of external sensual pleasures that they don't teach you in science is that, number one thing, they're fleeting. It's kind of, it's interesting, when I was a young business student, or when I was a young man, I took business. And there's this kind of like question in economics. Economics is kind of, we've got to make the economy go well, and the purpose of economics is to give people what they want, but people have unlimited desires. So how do you satisfy somebody with unlimited desires? And so similarly in the West today, what we see is that many people without a kind of compass of religion, people without a foundation of generosity, what they do is they chase these kind of limited desires. Chase from one desire to the next, one car to the next, one house to the next, never finding satisfaction in any of these things. So in this way, the promise of science, the promise of external sensual pleasures, it's like one of these kind of things when you go down a road, you're kind of going down a road in the summertime, you see it looks like water, far off in the distance. And if anybody's ever tried to drive towards that water, it keeps kind of going away. It's always like, 20, 30, 40 feet in front. And this is how it is with external things, with external sensual pleasures. That's why the Buddha compares them to a grass torch. Somebody holds a grass torch and goes in the wind. then the fire from the grass torch comes back and burns them. If somebody, he compares it to a chain of bones. So if somebody has this well-scraped chain of bones and you throw it to a dog, they don't get any meat off that. They don't get any satisfaction out of these sensual pleasures. So in the West at the present time, what this kind of thing has led to culturally, I think what we're seeing now is a search. It's kind of a search for something that provides true satisfaction. So in all these great religions, in Christianity and Buddhism and all these things we practice, there are things that people can do that last longer than these external sensual pleasures, that are a better investment than these external sensual pleasures. And a person, when I was a young man, you kind of learn all these different ways to invest your money if you go to school for a business. Okay, you can invest in this fund, you can invest in that fund, and if the stock market stays the same price in 30 years, you'll be able to retire with a Lamborghini or a yacht or whatever it is, however much you put in there. But the interesting thing about this kind of external wealth, what the Buddha teaches, this external wealth is something that's very inconstant. Yeah? So you can have all your money saved up in the stocks, but if the stock market changes, there goes your money. Kind of don't have it anymore. All this kind of stuff you work really hard to get is no longer there for you. But what the Buddha teaches, I think what it's also emphasized in Christianity, is that there's another type of investment. There's kind of investment in external things. But there's also this kind of investment in internal good qualities. Now the difference between these types of investment is that if you have a big Lamborghini, you have a big house, you want it, everybody else wants it too. And so things that everybody wants, they try to take away. And this is what we see in the world at large. When the world at large gains an emphasis on external sensual pleasures, one nation gets a lot, other nations want to take it. One person gets a lot, other people want to take it. And it's for this reason there's fighting, brawling, contention, all these various things. They have this desire for external for external things as their root. This is their root. It's kind of the root of fighting, I guess, one of them you might call. So when a person practices this aspect of generosity, this aspect of giving away, what they're actually doing is going against the grain of that. Going against the grain of searching outwards for external sensual pleasures to building up a happiness that comes from internal good qualities, from internal wholesome qualities. Now the difference between the former type of happiness and this type of happiness is that even if somebody gets jealous of how much you're giving away, they can't take away the good qualities in your mind. You're going to start a war with somebody, to try to steal their good mental qualities, you won't be successful. You can take their house away, you won't be successful in robbing them of their wholesome qualities. This is something that somebody can only lose for themselves. So for a person who's spent their life, whether they're Christian or Buddhist or whatever they may be, engaged in the pursuit of happiness through internal good and wholesome qualities, this is an investment that's secure. You've got these kind of secure, tax-free, tax-sheltered, government-backed, guaranteed investments. But if the government falls, those investments go. But whoever does a good deed, whoever puts in place these causes, what they reap is happiness. And that's a happiness that's guaranteed. It's guaranteed to ripen because this is the way that things work. So when a person is looking for happiness, what they tend to look for is these external things, but truly, the real type of happiness is when somebody looks inside. There's this kind of really neat sutta where there's this kind of, I guess he might have been a deva. He comes to visit the Buddha, and he says, Venerable Sir, I'm paraphrasing, I can never remember suttas exactly, but he says, Venerable Sir, can the end of the world be reached by traveling? Right? And this is kind of the goal, one of the big, okay, where's the end of the universe? What's the universe like? What's it really like? What's it not like? All these kind of questions that you have in, say, like physics, science. And so the Buddha says, I say that the end of the universe can't be reached by traveling. And then the Deva says, it's amazing that you said that. Because in my last life, I was a skywalker. It's kind of, I guess it's a type of Deva, or maybe an ascetic with a lot of psychic powers. And he said, my stride was like this. I could step across the ocean in one step. And my speed was like this. I could go as fast as a kind of a shot arrow. I think they like shot over the shadow of a palm tree or something like this. And so that means really fast. And he says, with this kind of speed, this kind of stride. I had this desire. Can I reach the end of the universe? So he said, I lived 100 years and I set out traveling for the end of the universe, but I didn't reach it. I died on the way. It means even if you can, with physics, get to a warp 9 like they have in Star Trek, you still don't get to the end of the universe. What the Buddha says next is very kind of interesting. He says, although you can't reach the end of the universe by traveling, the end of the universe, and paraphrasing again, is in this fathom-long body. That means is that we are the ones who perceive the universe. We perceive it through our eyes. We perceive it through our ears, through our nose. People perceive the universe through their tongue, through their body. People perceive the universe for their mind. So what this means is that we're at the center of all of our worlds. We are all in this room together, but all of us actually live in different worlds. My perception here as a monk is different than the experience of everybody else. So what this means is that to change the world, to make one's world a good place, what one has to do is change one's mind. And you can kind of see this, If a person lives in a humongous house, they've done a lot of terrible deeds, they won't sleep well. Even on a bed with 20 cushions, red cushions at both ends and posturepedic foam. And yet, you can see, even today, there are monks who live in the forest, are exposed to the rain, who sleep on the ground, sleep on stones, and they sleep well. Actually, some of them sleep so deeply, they only need 4 hours of sleep a night. It's kind of very impressive to see. So what this means is that the mind is always chief. The mind is the thing that always comes first. It's the thing that always leads us. It's the thing that leads us to happiness. It's the thing that leads us to unhappiness. And in all the great religions, the things that lead us to happiness are good actions. The things that lead us to unhappiness are bad actions. So interestingly enough, another overlap between Buddhism and Christianity, all the various religions, is something that splits away from science, is they all have this idea of an afterlife. In other words, there's things that we do now that carry over. So we can make an investment now that benefits us when we die, when we pass away. And so the emphasis when one has this attitude that I'm going to make my investment in my mind, I'm going to make my investment in good things, is that their mind turns away from the external things in the world. Their mind turns away from the beauties they see outside, the beauties they see in cars, in houses, in money, to try to look for the beauties they can find in their own mind. Because it's these beauties that make their universe beautiful now. It's these beauties that when they die, carry them over to a beautiful place. All of this comes with the recognition that these external things to us are fleeting. The things that are outside of us, we can see them decay. Actually, when I was, I stay in this neighborhood, and there's some houses that are like brand new, and they knock down, like the neighborhood that I'm in is kind of this cottage. They were, in the 60s it was built, there were cottages for people from Rosedale. But now Toronto's humongous, and it's kind of like bursting its borders. So what you get now is people coming from Toronto and buying these old cottages and like knocking them down and building these like monster, humongous houses. You should see some of these houses. They're actually like mansions. So, if you're from that neighborhood, you're like, wow, this is a humongous house. Who's doing this? But the interesting thing about these houses is that they're so nice that some of the old houses that I saw, like I've been to Rosedale walking a couple times, they're nicer than the houses in Rosedale. They're going to look better. The houses in Rosedale, by comparison, you go look at them now, it's like, yeah, that's all right. I mean, it's big, but it's old, You can see, that the roof might need some work, that probably the timbers are sagging. After time, that's what happens. And even a palace becomes unpalatable. Even a kind of every type of gain turns to this. It kind of turns into its kind of opposite. And then something new springs up. The kind of little cottages in Pickering become the new Rosedale. Or maybe not the new Rosedale, but, really nice anyways, So this is the interesting thing about launching out to these types of sensual pleasures, to these gains, offerings, and fame. There's a sutta where the Buddha describes it like, there's a turtle. His turtle swimming in the sea. And this one turtle says to him, don't go to that area, but he goes to this kind of area anyway. And as a result, this hunter lances him with a harpoon. And so he comes back to the first turtle, and the first turtle says, well, I hope you haven't been hurt. And he's like, oh, I'm okay. But paraphrasing again, but he says, there's this cord that keeps dragging behind me. And he says, you're not okay. You have been wounded. He says, because of that cord, that your father, your grandfather, all these other turtles, I mean your father and grandfather in this kind of turtle lineage fell into disaster. And he said, now go, you're no longer one of us, you know. And so in this case, the hunter stands for Mara. Mara in Buddhism is like the devil, you know. The cord stands for delight and passion. And the harpoon stands for these external gains, offerings, and fame. Whoever is harpooned with these external gains, offerings, and fame is pulled up when they go up. Whoever is harpooned with gains, offerings, and fame is pulled down when they go down. When the stock market goes up, we go up. When the stock market goes down, we go down. And if we watch the stock market every day, we're always up and down. We might have a kind of heart attack, you know, watching the stock ticker. So all of this, the connecting thing between suffering, between what causes a person's world to be dark, what causes a person's world to be pulled around is desire. It's just this craving. It's just this very delight for these external things. And what this means is that as humans who can make intentions, we have the opportunity to change our desire. We have the opportunity to change our craving. We have the opportunity to change our delight. If we delight in gains, offerings, and fame, we're pulled around. But we can change that. We can change the focus of our delight from gains, offerings, and fame back to the qualities in our own mind. A person who does this pulls back when the devil pulls, when Mara pulls. Mara pulls right, they pull back left, you know, like a tug of war. When a person does this continually, eventually, for a period, Mara, the devil, gives up for a bit. He lets go for a bit. And this is when a person experiences ease of mind. This is when a person experiences peace of mind. Because the peace that comes from doing good, from training the mind, exceeds all other types of peace, all other types of happiness. So great is the power of the mind. So great is its potential for training. So when a person sees this kind of impermanence, when they see this kind of potential, they turn their mind towards realizing this potential. Remember when I was kind of young, I used to watch this, kind of bear with me with these kind of stories, but I used to watch this kind of like cartoon called DuckTales. You kind of, maybe some people who are my age might remember this. You had like Scrooge McDuck. He was like this really billionaire duck. And he had all these kind of like little nephew ducks, and they'd kind of go on adventures like Indiana Jones type adventures. And sometimes, you know, there'd be this theme where you come into this room, you know, and all these kind of adventure stories, at least as I remember them. You'd come into a room and there'd be like treasure in the room. But then there was like some obstacle. If you didn't get the treasure in time, you weren't getting it at all. You know, like the temple or whatever it was crashing and water was coming in, or, you know, you stepped on a bad booby trap and that was it. And in the same way, for everybody who's been born as a human, both in Christianity and Buddhism, we've come into a room with treasure. We've come into a room with potential. We've come into a room with opportunity. Because both in Christianity and in Buddhism, it's this place, this life as a human, where we have the chance to train our mind. What comes afterwards follows for a long, long, long time. So seeing this impermanence, seeing this danger, seeing this opportunity, somebody who's wise turns their mind to get as much treasure as they can before the temple collapses. Here, the treasure is a metaphor for the good qualities in our mind. Here, the kind of search that these young ducks went on to is a search for happiness, and nothing other than that. And here, the temple crashing is the inevitability that all humans face, that just as we're born, we're going to die. That's something that nobody escapes, that nobody can get away from. So knowing this, seeing this well, a person who lives their life well is a person who lives their life trying to cultivate their mind, trying to get as much treasure as they can. Because if you get into a room with treasure and you get a whole bunch, you might be set for life. In the same way, for a person who spends their life not on the pursuit of cars, not on the pursuit of houses, not on the pursuit of status, not on the pursuit of gains, but on the pursuit of a happiness inside, they're a person who accumulates this wealth. And this wealth can keep them set for a long, long time. And this is something that's the same in both Christianity and in Buddhism. The interesting thing about all these pursuits, though, this pursuit for outer wealth, this pursuit for inner wealth, is that there's still a cord attached to it. All of these things have a cord. This cord is nothing else than this craving, this desire to have, this desire to become. So long as that cord is present, we can be pulled to a good place if we tie it to something good. We can be pulled to a bad place if we tie it to something bad. So an even better way for a person to spend their life, to spend their investment, is to try to cut this cord, to try to make it so it doesn't pull us ever again. So this is the interesting thing. So long as one goes up when one is happy, one goes down when one is sad. So long as one goes up when one is praised, one goes down when one is blamed. So long as one goes up when one has gain, one goes down when one has loss. And these are called the worldly winds. It's in this way that the world blows us towards things we like, blows us away from things, or blows us towards things we dislike. Just like the wind sometimes blows east, sometimes blows west, sometimes our lives are blessed, sometimes our lives are cursed. And so long as a person is attached, so long as their sail is up, it's possible for them to be blown wherever the wind takes them, wherever the wind goes. So the best way for a person to spend their life is to try to cut the cord, to try to lower the sail, to try to lift the crossbar, to try to fill in the moat, to try to find a way to find a happiness that's true, a happiness that's real, a happiness that doesn't change. Because in the end, this is the goal of everything that people do. People want money for happiness. People want good internal qualities for happiness. People want heaven for happiness. People want kids for happiness. People want everything for happiness. It's all for that sake. At the end of the day, this is the purpose of our life, to try to find a happiness that's true. And the way to find a happiness that's true is through this dispassion. So long as a person has passion, they have a cord. So long as a person cuts the cord with dispassion, then they're free. A person who's cordless goes wherever they like, at ease. So in this way, when a person spends their life practicing to do good qualities, practicing their life to train their mind, practicing their life for dispassion, at the least, they can be born in heaven. At the most, they can find an escape from this very cord, this very passion and delight, this sail that's raised that causes us to be blown up when things are good, blown down when things are bad. They can find an escape from suffering. They can find nibbana. And it's searching for this. That's the best way, the best thing that one can do with one's life, the best way that one can use this opportunity, the best purpose for which one can collect this treasure. That is dispassion, cessation, nibbana. Okay, so I think leave that for reflection. And did anybody have any, Puri was saying, do some questions afterwards, see how long I talk for? Oh good, that was 30 minutes, so we're we're on time. So does anybody have any questions?
So is it the impermanence which causes suffering, or the clinging to what is impermanent causes suffering? Impermanence is the inherent thing, you can't help. Mm-hmm. So it is the clinging part which causes suffering.
Yeah. So it's the clinging, and the Buddha, he describes kind of like somebody who gets shot with 2 arrows, right? So, if you get shot with 1 arrow, that's something you can't avoid. Like if you have a body and the body gets old, you feel, the effects of aging. That's one type of suffering. The other type is the second arrow, which is the mental arrow. The first type, this kind of impermanence, we can't change. The second arrow is the one we can withdraw. And this is where most of the suffering, this is where the suffering, the dukkha comes from. the unpleasant feeling will be there, but the dukkha, the actual act, the feeling of suffering comes from this mental arrow. Yeah.
So to stop these constant arrows, is it a training the mind pretty much the solution for that? The constant, like mental arrows. The bodily arrow you can't have.
Mm-hmm.
So what is the solution? Like, is it a type of meditation and seeing this happening within?
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, in Buddhism, there's kind of basically a threefold way. It's kind of what they call sila, which means keeping moral. There's something which is called samadhi, which means these states of absorption, where your mind achieves a state of one-pointedness. And there's something which is called panya, which means having this kind of a discernment, which is able to cut defilements. It basically means like after you've... So the way that the monks who've achieved the goals describe it is that when a person kind of has a foundation in morality, then when they sit down to meditate, then it's possible for them. Like, when you have a good foundation for a house, you can build on it. It's kind of possible for them to focus in on their mind or focus in on their meditation object, their mind to go into states of absorption. And when the mind comes out of these states of absorption, it's very sharp. It isn't thinking about anything at all. So at that time, if one turns the mind to contemplate on impermanence, then that's when that kind of contemplation goes much deeper, because the mind is kind of proliferating and running off everywhere. And it can stay with the topic and see the ways in which it tries to escape. Yeah. So in this way, this kind of path is used to cut defilements, to try to pull out that second arrow. Yeah.
So now Buddhism refers to Mara. Is Mara a being or is a state of your mind?
In the canon, it's pretty clear he's a being.
Being.
Yeah, like that's an actual being. Yeah, so it's there was this kind of, I guess you'd say, like there's this kind of liking in the West, especially to view like Mara or the devil as an allegory. In other words, he's kind of like a metaphor for the dark states within our mind. But actually almost all the meditation masters, the Buddha, in Christianity as well, it's not just us who's in this universe. There are actually beings that we can't see. And so that means that they can influence us. So it means not all the thoughts that come into a person's head might be your thoughts. It might be something whispering in your ear. And so in both Christianity, Buddhism, all the religions, there are these external beings with will powers, things like that of their own. And I guess you call the apex of evil is this kind of being who occupies this position. They changes when that one being dies, another one kind of takes that position where he's basically a tempter and likes to use everything evil to keep people bound. And that being is Mara. So it's in the canon, it's a real being. It's not a state of mind. Although the states of mind are also real, it's a being, yeah. Okay, 이철어드.
So do you have any advice that you can give the youngsters, because they have to go to school and their life is ahead of them, so which means they will want to invest in, like you said, not of course stocks, but in many things, from marriage to various things. They are building up their lives, right?
Mm-hmm.
What advice can you give the youngsters, and how they can balance their life?
Yes, so I mean, at least for myself, kind of growing up in the West, life was seen as a kind of an unending pursuit of sensual, external pleasures. And it was seen as a right. Like the people who got them, that was their right to have them, So if you got them, you were like a person who could get them, And so long as you held them, you were praised for that. In Buddhism, a person's life is seen differently. It's not so much seen as this kind of, race to see who gets the most bananas. It's more like a person going through life has mutual responsibilities that they need to fulfill. So if a person doesn't become a monk, then in whatever role a person's in, they do their part and then let the other person do their part. So what that means is that life becomes a lot less of this kind of race to get as much as you can. You can only do something halfway. And then the other parties within a person's life have to meet one halfway as well. So as an employee or a boss, one has duties towards one's workers. One has responsibilities towards them to treat them well, to pay them fair wages, to run the business soundly, all these various things. And in return, the workers have to work in a particular way. So whatever, I don't know what fields people go into, right? There's so many fields. But all these fields have mutual responsibilities. So I guess the biggest change, at least myself growing up in the West, I could see is if somebody takes it on that like everything is because of their own talent, then when something doesn't go the way they want, they try to force people and things into doing what they want. And this creates a lot of problems, both within a person's mind, within their external relationships. Like if they're married, their marriage can break apart. If they're a boss, people will hate them, try to do bad things to them. So the difference between that and the Buddha's conception is that we're always in a role. Wherever we are, we're not like a solid person. We always have a role to fulfill. So if we're a worker, then we refer to our boss in a certain way. We refer to our mother and father a different way. If we become a parent, we relate to our children one way. Our children should relate to us another way. And the thing that's behind all of this is that all the people who we interact with in these roles, they have choices that they can make. So it's not just because of our talents that things happen. It's a kind of cooperative act. And if the other half doesn't fulfill their part of the bargain, we can't stop it. So what this means is that there's a lot more humility in this way of living. This way of living is, okay, I'll fulfill my responsibilities, but I don't know if the other side will fulfill theirs. Not everything that's happened to me is mine because of my talents. I'm the one who made this happen. This humility also prepares a person when things don't go well, not to get too upset. Because if the whole world that revolves around a person is because of their talents, then when their world doesn't go the way they want, they must be talentless. Terrible anxiety, depression can set in because of that. So as far as, if I were, say, to, have gone a different route and not have been a monk, then probably that would be if I was to take one single thing, if I could not that I want to, but if somehow magically I remembered everything, that I learned from Buddhism and I was back when I was 20, that would probably be the one thing that I'd want to take with me, which is that wherever I go, I have roles to fulfill. And those roles are a responsibility. It's something that I take on to uphold that relationship, not something I take on to get the most for myself. And that the other half always has to fulfill. Like if I got married and, I do my part and, my partner doesn't do their part, then I can't stop it, And in that case, the marriage might fall apart. And so in this way, that humility is there. Because I remember being a young man and when things didn't go the way I wanted, I'd be like, oh man, what did I do wrong? I thought I was talent, I thought I could do this, but, it didn't work. I must not really have that talent. And then things would change and it goes well again. Oh, I really do have that talent. It really is mine. So when one has this kind of humility, then life is a lot less threatening. Yeah? And it also helps to turn one towards spirituality because one realizes that these external things, these external relationships are not something one can control. So better to look for something that one can control. Yeah? So in all these ways, this attitude of having mutual duties, mutual responsibilities, wherever one is going through life, helps to turn one towards the wholesome, away from the unwholesome. So, yeah.
Also, is self-compassion something very important, especially kids growing up, because it's always like you said, if something goes wrong, it's self-blame. It's society is driven that way. So I think self-compassion is also
how do you cultivate it?
How do you cultivate if you can?
Definitely. I guess you say self-compassion, not being too hard on oneself. And part of it comes from humility. I think that's probably the quality that's most lacking in Western education. Because with the decline of religion, with the rise of science, science was very kind of focused on cause and effect. And if you had the talents to put the right causes into place, then you could do that irrespective. So there's a lack of humility there. You can see that, at least I saw it growing up in Western culture for myself, this kind of lack of self-compassion is actually can, not always, in some cases can come from this attitude that if I can't do it, it means there's something wrong with me. Yeah. But actually behind that attitude is a Western hubris. Not to say that's in every kid, like they're conceited, but behind the roots, or what I see at least from my growing up, behind the roots of that attitude, for lack of a better word, maybe not the root, but one of the prime causes, is this Western idea that I can do whatever I want. I can manipulate the environment, I can manipulate people, there's a cause and effect to everything. So when a person has this kind of attitude that whatever comes into my life is because of my talents, then a lot of self-blame can come from other people. If one isn't talented enough to make what should happen happen, if one loses one's job, it's because of their talents. You know? If one's marriage doesn't work, it's because of their lack of talent. And all of that, if one takes on this external attitude, self-blame is there. You know? If things don't go the way they should, there's self-blame, lack of compassion. So probably, at least my feeling, one of the really good ways to cultivate self-compassion is to tie it up with humility. Not this kind of humility like I'm a bad person, I'm like a terrible, I can't do things. That's not like the type of humility. But this humility that I can only control so much in the world. I can only control so much about other people's reactions to me. I can only control so much of my job. I can only control so much of my relationship. If I do my part and it falls apart, there's nothing I can do. So this kind of, I guess you'd say, humility towards one's abilities, towards everybody's abilities, can protect a person. When things don't go the right way and friends say, oh, that was, you're stupid, you didn't. I hear kids are really mean now on the internet, They play some games or something like that, the game doesn't go well, and then their game team members are like, you stupid. Anyways, if one has this kind of humility, then one realizes, look, I can't control it. I can't control everything. There's only so much I can do. So then if one's friends blame one, okay, well, wait a minute. They can blame me if I want, but this is the way the world works. Then one won't blame oneself. As long as, this is the important part, one does one's part. If one actually doesn't do anything that one's supposed to do that's good, then actually one is worthy of blame, So as long as one fulfills one's responsibility, if things don't go the way that they should, then there's a good opportunity for self-compassion. There's a good opportunity to think, I did what I could, it didn't turn out. That's the way of the world. The second thing about self-compassion is that if one has an internal quest in addition to the external quest, because if all of one's weight is put on external things, it's like standing on the end of a tree branch, So if you go way out to the end of a tree branch, anybody who's climbed trees, when the wind blows, the branch blows, you get scared, And for good reason. So for a person going through their life, it's good to, you got to stand on the tree branch. You have to be in the world. You have to fulfill your responsibilities, but also to have an arm around the trunk. In other words, to have an arm around the Dhamma. So that way, if the external world falls apart, you still have your arm around the trunk. If the branch breaks, you still have something to hang on to. And in this way, when things don't go well in one's external world, one doesn't have to beat oneself up so much because, look, I'm still doing well inside. I'm still doing well in the Dhamma. So I guess those are the two things that come to mind. I'm sure there are many others, but, those are the two things that came to mind. Yeah.
In this terminology, like expectations is the root for suffering, right? Like we expect a lot of things from oneself and from others. Is the expectation the root of kind of suffering, part of this suffering?
So in Buddhism, what you might call there's many kind of branches out of what you might call craving. And sometimes they're a cause of suffering, sometimes they're a cause for the end of suffering. So for example, if you have high expectations for your morality, that's a totally different thing than having high expectations for, your performance at a soccer match, right? So your morality is something you can really control. And having high expectations for oneself is the same as hiriotapa, kind of ties together, having this sense of shame. Look, if I do this bad action, that's beneath me. That's beneath my expectations, So just having expectations isn't necessarily bad. It tends to be more where they're directed and how they're directed. At least my understanding. Yeah.
Is it something like a realistic contentment? Contentment about what you can do and what you cannot do.
I guess in some ways,
you
yeah,
can't do as
yeah.
well as somebody else, but you realize what your limits are and you're content to be there.
Yeah, so externally, sometimes we have to be content with what comes to us. The Buddha, and I think many spiritual teachers teach that internally, we shouldn't rest content with our wholesome qualities until, at least in Buddhism, we achieve Nibbana. That's one of the things he's very clear about, is that we shouldn't think, I've got enough wisdom, I've got enough mindfulness, I've got enough good qualities, let me kick back. We should always be kind of discontent, well, not discontent, but we should always want more in terms of our spiritual path until we achieve the end of the goal. So I guess, externally, right? Like, if you're not the best soccer player, okay, realistic content. Internally, the Buddha doesn't, in some ways, I guess you'd say, recommends having not resting content with one's spiritual attainments.
Yeah, I was referring to the external thing.
It can definitely, my understanding can definitely be something skillful. Yeah.
So desire is not necessarily bad. For example, Chanda Iddhipada, like something you want to become better in spirituality, is not a bad thing. That the desire, like desire of craving, that's kind of a negative desire, right? Like desire to become good internally.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because there are in the modern day there's been monks who are Arahants who finished their kind of path, and there was this especially as Buddhism came to the West, there was one monk who was known to be an Arahant, and he had a student, and in Thailand they have these kind of trucks, kind of not like here, you get in the back of these trucks and they put like all these bars on like a pickup truck and you just grab onto the bar and go. You're in like the back of this truck. And he said that he noticed this monk, there was one person who said he noticed this monk who's an Arahant was grabbing onto the bars really tight. He's like, well, wait a minute, this means that this monk is afraid. He's afraid of dying, But when it comes, so in other words, he has craving to live. But in other words, like when the Buddha describes the cessation of craving for an Arahant, he describes kamatanha, bhavatanha, and vibhavatanha. I mean, that doesn't mean you're done with all desire. If you didn't have any desires, there's one monk who was known to be an Arahant, he said, the only people who don't have desires are dead. So in other words, you can be an Arahant, somebody who's ended desire and want your students to do well. You can be an Arahant, somebody who has no desires and, want to cross the road. So it's not just a total cessation of all types of desires. Those three are what gets singled out by the Buddha. Yeah.